What is a runway incursion? Any occurrence at an aerodrome involving the incorrect presence of an aircraft, vehicle, or person on the protected area of a surface designated for the landing and takeoff of aircraft. This can happen to you, me, and everybody. The fact also shows experienced airline pilots with more than 15,000 hours still susceptible to runway incursion. We can recall the worst runway incursion accident in the history, such as two Boeing 747 in Tenerife and Singapore Airlines in Taiwan. In 2024, we're all sad with the Japan Airlines 516 runway incursion accident. Let's talk about it and what should we do to prevent this accident happen in the future.
Hi, I'm Guyardi, a passionate flight instructor and very pilot who loves to share my aviation journey to the world. I hope my videos will encourage you to become a pilot and let me help you to reach your dream with 14 the Pilot Flight Academy.
What was happened with Japan Airlines JL516? Basically, it was on final approach and landed. The other airplane entered the runway, so unfortunate they collided. An accident happened. JL516 did receive a clearance to land from the tower, and so they did with back. The Coast Guard aircraft had been instructed to hold short of the runway at intersection C5. Something wrong over there, and the accident happened. I'm Dr. Guyardi, FA Gold Seal Flight Instructor, an ATP, and also NTSB graduate for Aircraft Accident Investigation. Today, we're going to talk about how to prevent this happen in the future. What's really happened is a runway incursion. Runway incursion is daily incident and accident, happen regularly and considered one of the biggest risks in aviation. Based on the statistic, the runway incursion in the United States, an average of 3 runway incursions occur daily. According to the FAA data, approximately 65% of all runway incursions are caused by pilots. There are 4 categories of runway incursion. First is pilot deviations, operational errors, operational deviation, and vehicle or pedestrian deviations. And from these 4 categories, we can expand that into 8 problems. The 8th problem includes the aerodrome complexity and variation from standard. That's why a lot of hotspot indicator for the pilot to be aware. A lot of runway incursion and accident happen on that confusion. Number 2, inappropriate underreadable of lack of airfield signs, marking, or lights. Number 3, communication including misunderstood the transmission, traffic, and radio congestion.
Channel 981, join right, Julia, join Alpha, hold short of November.
Okay, I'll say it again. Hold short of Mike Alpha, M-A, Mike Alpha, not November.
Okay, hold short of Mike Alpha, 981.
Air China 981, have they cleared you into the ramp?
Okay, clear to the ramp.
No, that was a question. Have the ramp people cleared you into the gate?
Roger, to the gate, Air China 981.
I'll try it again. It's a question. Hold your position. This is a question. Interrogative. Have you been cleared into your gate?
And number 4, the human factors including psychological factors like fatigue, distraction, complacency, and number 5, environmental factors including weather, visibility. And number 6, pre-flight planning of ground movements. Number 7, pilot application of correct rules and procedures. There's a big problem with the SOPs. And the last one is pilot training, knowledge, and experience relating to the aerodrome marking, signs, lights, and how they should operate on the airport. And these 8 problems contribute a lot of runway incursion worldwide. Based on the NTSB data, what just happened in Japan is one of example or proof that the number of occurrences reported is really true. So based on the data, crossing hold short line takes the first place of numbers of occurrence. Why that even happened? You can see here in the table, the situation awareness, miscommunication, and distraction are the top 3 of the number of occurrence reported as contribution factor for the runway incursion. So when that happened, we know that when pilot lack of situation awareness, when the pilot has a miscommunication, and when the pilot got distracted, the biggest risk could happen is the pilot crossed the hold short bar without instruction. It's pretty much the same with the Coast Guard in Japan when they had instruction to do hold short. Instead of the stop on the hold bars, they crossed the hold bars and finally collided with the Japan Airlines A350 there. So I also have the data of the runway incursion to show that the 27% the pilot failed to hold short of runway as instructed. And why that happened? Based on the contributing factor diagram, we can see the 61.6% is because of the miss of communication. And this is pretty common. This also happened with the Tenerife accident, and we know that the worst disaster of the runway incursion, that both 747 collided in the runway and killed all the passengers. I also pull out the data based on the 2023 regional runway incursion totals from the FAA for full year 2023. We can see the PD is the pilot deviation contribute 1,070 accident or incidents or occurrence of runway incursion on the statistics. So it means the human factors will lead to the pilot deviation and contribute the highest number of the total occurrence. So now I'm going to share to you tips to prevent this to happen again in the future, especially when you fly at night in an airplane with two cruise operations. So now let's discuss the strategy to prevent the runway incursion happen in our life. No matter you're a GA pilot or you're flying the 737 like I do. Well, let's start. The FAA recommends all the pilots to review the Advisory Circular 9173 for runway incursion prevention. There are great tips from the FAA and we're going to discuss some of them. On the pre-flight planning, we can review and understand the airfield signage and marking. The first part is the pre-flight planning. I can recommend to review and understand airfield signage and markings. Also, number 2, review the appropriate airport diagram. Review any hotspot and identify on the diagram. Print a copy for use in the cockpit. So this is an example for airport diagram. So we're looking to Haneda Airport in Japan, runway 34 right, and this is all the taxi intersections that the pilot should know, because the tower will give you a clearance to enter the runway through the full length. It means, let's say you're taking off from the Charlie 1, or the Japan Coast Guard was instructed to hold at Charlie 5. So this all airport diagram is very crucial, and every pilot should understand thoroughly, have the good situation awareness, and brief between the crews. So let's say you're flying the airplane with two cruise pilot operations, like the 737, we got a captain here and we got a first officer. So both the crew resource management must manage how to implement the correct procedures in order to prevent the runway incursion to happen. One of them, this is the airport diagram. So we recommend print this as a copy in the cockpit and you brief properly before even taxi or entering the runway. Number 3, review airfield NOTAM. NOTAM is Notice to Air Emissions, and current ATIS for any taxiway closures, runway closures, construction activity, or other airfield specific risks. For example, the 747 from Singapore Airlines in Taiwan took off from wrong runway and killed 83 people on board. So we want to know from the Notice from Air Emissions which runway is closed, what is the closure of the airport, and make sure you brief it properly. During taxi, copy the taxi clearance and use the airport diagram to review the taxi route to the assigned runway prior to releasing the brakes and beginning taxi. What I like from the ForeFlight, you have the scratch pad here, okay, and also we can use the craft for the clearance of departure, and there's a lot of template here in order to help you to manage the clearance records and to take the ATIS. So in this case, I always use the draw, and I'm using the pen here. If you don't like to use the paper and pen, so you can use your iPad. Make sure you write down all instructions. This is the very basic things to do, but that's gonna save your life. So for me, every time I fly, if I handle the radio, I always note every instruction from the ATC, no matter that's a taxi clearance, when I'm in the air, changing the frequency, changing the altitude, changing the heading, I always put a note, because somehow we're very busy and we get complacent with all the avionics, we got fatigue. So I always can revert to my notes, and that's always saved my life, especially when you're flying into the big airport. You know, a lot of hotspots and a lot of intersections. Put a note there, make sure you have a good EFB to support your flight. Number 2, during the taxi, I recommend you to focus attention and have your eyes out of the cockpit when taxiing. I always recommend my students to minimize the head-down operation. Don't do any radios, don't check your iPad, just focus in front of you and do the scanning from the left to the right every 10 degrees. It's just same like when you're flying in the air. I always exercise extreme caution whenever I fly to the busy airport. The point is, pay attention outside the airplane more than inside when you are taxi, and that's gonna save your life. Number 3, prior to crossing any runway during taxi, ensure you have a clearance to cross. Visually check to ensure there's no conflicting traffic prior to crossing the runway. This is very critical if you happen to depart or arriving to an airport that has multiple runways like New York Kennedy, Long Beach Airport in California, or Chicago O'Hare. They have crossing runway, and that's really critical for you to understand the clearance and make sure you verify outside view and pay attention outside the airplane to make sure there's no conflicting traffic when you cross the taxiway to the runway. For the takeoff, number 1, if cleared to line up and wait, turn on all exterior lights except the takeoff and landing lights. If you have been holding in a position on the runway for more than 90 seconds or upon seeing a potential conflict, contact the tower. When clear for takeoff, turn on all exterior lights including takeoff and landing light. Now, for example, I'm inside the 737 MAX cockpit and in front of me is the holding bar. That's a hold short position. They call that Sierra 7, and for runway 07 right, okay, and there's a solid yellow line. It means that we need a clearance to cross that. It means we have to wait here until the tower give us a clearance to enter the runway. Unless we got a clearance, we need to stop here, and as the FAA recommend us to do, we need to turn on all the exterior lights at night or low visibility. I put the logo lights on position on the steady, and I'm gonna put the strobe and steady when I enter the runway. Anti-collision should be on when I start the engine. Wing lights and wheel well lights on, assuming this is low visibility and night. Now, I still have the taxi lights because whenever I taxi, I always put the taxi light on. When I'm stopping, I put the taxi light off. So now, when I get a takeoff clearance, let's say AstroJet 123, you're clear for takeoff. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn off the taxi light, put the runway lights on, landing lights on, put the takeoff lights including all the landing lights on, and then put the strobe and steady for the position. So that's how we set the lights, and after that we just continue to enter the runway, but we need to scan. If you're not sure, you gotta take off clearance, but you still see there's an airplane and very short final, you should talk and ask to the tower what's really going on, whether you're really clear for takeoff. Number 2, conduct clearing turns to check all areas prior to entering any runway. So let's say I'm sitting on the left side and the right side pilot must scan on the right, and I will look to the runway, make sure all the runway clear, and then I'll change to my right side, make sure the approach path is clear, also verified by the pilot monitoring beside me. So this is a practice and really important for everybody who wants to take off, no matter you fly a small airplane or the big jets. Always do the clearing turn from the departure end of runway or the approach path. Okay, now I'm proceeding to the final approach in Soekarno-Hatta, Jakarta, runway 07 right for RNAV approach. So I'm approaching to the final approach waypoint. I'm putting landing gear down. I'm flying at night and the weather is a little bit marginal. So now we need to exercise extreme cautions. I need to divide my attention between the pilot flying and the pilot monitoring. Then the pilot monitoring will monitoring my flight and also look outside. That include to find whether there's a traffic in the middle of the runway or some traffic that come to the runway or any risk that will make the runway incursion happen on my flight. So I'm gonna put final flaps here. That's a 1000 annunciator and I'll call stable. And at this point, the pilot monitoring will look outside, make sure there's no potential runway incursion, there's no airplane gonna cross the runway or proceeding the runway without takeoff clearance. And I disengage autopilot prior to the minimums. Now the pilot monitoring will look outside because we're passing 500 This is the short final. Make sure there's no traffic in the intersection. All right, that's minimums. Continue.
200. 100. 50, 40, 30, 20, 10.
So now when we exit the runway, make sure all the airplane cross the holding bars completely. Today we have learned how to prevent runway incursion happen to our life. Again, no matter you're flying the GA airplane or flying the jet like 737, basically it's the same principle. The FAA wants you to have a good preparation to avoid the runway incursion happen to your life. We send our deepest condolences for all casualties from the Japan Coast Guard. Hopefully, this will never happen again in the aviation industry. 14-day Pilot Flight Academy always do our best to maintain a high level of safety in each training that we have. So we welcome you to our program and become a better pilot.